Welcome back, 8th grade leaders in training. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for today's explainer. You know, when you flip through a history book, it's really easy to just see the past as this dry list of dates, names, and events that were just always meant to happen. But that is completely backwards. History is actually a series of massive, world-altering choices made by regular people who were under an immense amount of pressure. Literally every monumental event we study started in a room with a leader facing a huge problem. And today, we're stepping right into that decision room.
To really set the stage for how we evaluate these massive choices, we're looking at this incredibly powerful piece of wisdom. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. That's Proverbs 15:22. And it establishes this crucial foundational idea for us. Even the greatest leaders in human history didn't just operate in a vacuum. They needed advice. They desperately needed diverse perspectives, and they had to understand the context of their time to make sound decisions. As leaders in training, realizing that you don't have to have all the answers on your own, but rather that you need to actively seek wise counsel is step one.
So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to explore the power of past decisions, open up some heavy case files on Truman, Lincoln, and the Marshall Plan, extract those key leadership insights, and then anchor the whole thing in education, morality, and peace.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the power of past decisions, and exactly why history matters.
Look, we aren't just memorizing facts today. We are literally studying the blueprints of leadership. By evaluating the decisions of the past, we start to understand how those choices shaped our future, sometimes for the better, and yeah, sometimes for the worse. To really build up our problem-solving muscles, we need a concrete formula. So this is going to be your analytical toolkit. Step 1, assess the reasoning. Why did they make the choice they did? Step 2, understand the context. What was actually going on around them at that exact moment? And step 3, suggest alternative outcomes. If they had chosen differently, what might have happened? We apply these 3 steps so we can look at history not as passive observers, but as active problem solvers.
Now, you might be wondering, why is it so important to evaluate historical decisions in the first place? Well, it's because the future is going to throw some incredibly complex challenges at you, for sure. By looking at the reasoning, the available options, and the eventual outcomes of past leaders, we learn incredibly valuable lessons for our own leadership today. We're essentially just borrowing their experience to navigate our own futures.
Moving right along to our first case file. Section 2, Truman and the Atomic Bomb, an impossible choice.
Picture this. We're traveling back to the very end of World War II. President Harry Truman was faced with what was arguably one of the most agonizing, monumentally complex choices any leader has ever had to make. On one hand, Truman was looking at a desperate military need to end the conflict quickly. The war was devastating, and ending it swiftly was an absolute massive priority. But balancing against that priority was a terrifying reality. Using atomic bombs meant causing unprecedented, massive destruction and deeply compromising civilian safety. Ultimately, the decision did end the war, but it came with an almost unimaginable cost.
So, looking at those absolutely agonizing trade-offs, can you give one benefit and one drawback of Truman's decision? Evaluating this choice requires us to hold 2 incredibly heavy realities at once: the military objectives and the global impacts. Real leadership often involves heavy trade-offs where there is just no perfectly clean answer, and evaluating this helps us really grasp the immense burden of command. Let's open up our next historical case file, Section 3, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, Shifting the Focus.
Imagine leading a fractured nation under the crushing pressure of the American Civil War. President Abraham Lincoln issued a proclamation to free enslaved people in Confederate states. Now, a key historical nuance here, something people often misunderstand, is that it didn't actually free all enslaved people immediately. But consider the main purpose. It shifted the entire focus of the Civil War directly toward ending slavery. This fundamentally altered the meaning of the conflict from a political dispute over union to a full-blown moral crusade for freedom.
So when we ask, what was the main purpose of the Emancipation Proclamation, it's vital to grasp how a single document, released at exactly the right strategic moment, completely redirected the moral compass of an entire nation. The context and the intended consequences of this one decision changed the trajectory of American history forever. All right, on to our final historical case file for today. Section 4, the Marshall Plan, Rebuilding for the Future. The dust has finally settled on World War II. Europe is utterly devastated, and the United States has to figure out a strategy for what happens next. The action they took was to provide massive economic aid to rebuild those devastated European economies. But listen, this wasn't just charity. It was brilliant strategic foresight. By rebuilding those economies, the U.S. prevented the spread of communism in highly vulnerable areas and successfully promoted long-term global alliances that literally still exist today.
So, how did the Marshall Plan actually help Europe? Just let that question hang in your mind for a second. It provided immediate economic relief, yes, but it rippled out to create profound, lasting global stability. It is a perfect example of how an economic decision can become a massive geopolitical success.
Bringing it all together now in Section 5, Key Insights of Leadership, the Rules of the Room. Before we outline these rules, I want you to think back to Truman, Lincoln, and the architects of the Marshall Plan. How can context change a leader's decision? Well, public opinion, the available technology of the time, and the extremely limited information they had on hand all dramatically influenced what options were even on the table. Context just always muddies the waters of decision-making. Looking at all these cases, we basically have three huge universal takeaways. First, every single decision has intended and unintended consequences. You can plan for one specific outcome, but others will inevitably ripple out. Second, leaders almost always have to act with incomplete information. Honestly, you rarely have 100% of the facts when you have to make a tough call. And third, evaluating these past decisions is exactly what guides our future choices. These right here are the analytical tools you need to be highly effective leaders in your own lives.
Which brings us to our final stop. Section 6, Education, Morality, and Peace, the ultimate compass. You know, having the analytical skills to evaluate decisions, knowing how to weigh variables, and understanding historical context, that is really just half the battle. And this brings us to a core philosophy of the HeroesMart Academy Godly Learner series: education without morality will hurt. Being smart is simply not enough. Really, what is the point of being highly educated and intellectually brilliant if you totally lack the moral compass to guide those smarts? You'll just continue to make bad choices that hurt yourself and the people around you. True leadership requires intertwining your education with biblical morality. And this alignment actually comes with a profound guarantee. Romans 8:6-7 promises peace of mind to everyone who keeps their mind spiritual. When you combine a sharp, educated intellect with a rock-solid spiritual and moral foundation, you don't just make better decisions, you achieve true, lasting peace of mind. And that's exactly what we experience when we engage deeply with this material.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought for today, 8th graders. You have the analytical tools to evaluate history. You understand the heavy weight of leadership and the reality of massive consequences. But how will you use your spiritual and moral compass to guide your future decisions? The choice, ultimately, is entirely yours. Thank you so much for joining me in the decision room today, and I honestly can't wait to see the incredible leaders you become.